we dive into today's episode, let me tell you how you can call me, beat me, if you want to reach me. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. We are available on all major platforming. If you prefer to watch your podcast, this is a video podcast and it is available on YouTube and on Spotify. You can follow the podcast over on Instagram at Femme Furious Pod. Over there, we've got the content schedule. So if you want to see upcoming content that the podcast is going to cover, that is over on Instagram. You can also see a visual of the burn book every week, plus clips from every episode. So that's over on Instagram. You can also send me an email. You have thoughts and opinions, or you just need to write a letter of severe depression with the first episode without Pedro Pascal. I'm here for it. You can send me an email at femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. And you can also join the Two Femme, Two Furious community. It's a wonderful space to gather with other like-minded folks. There's nothing like being in community with women or with femme-leaning people. So I encourage you, come join us over there. It's currently on a promotion. It's 90% off. You can get it for $1 whole to join a community. You will be loved, supported, and cared for, okay? Especially if you are a pop culture celeb like me. And so you can use the code LAUNCH at checkout. That will give you Femme Furious fully loaded bonus episodes. There is one coming out for Mother's Day that has audience input from all of you lovely people about our favorite fictional moms, okay? There's a 15% discount on merch and live events, Sunday brunch, which is a virtual monthly hangout, the Suffragette Award, which gives you voting privileges, okay? It's how we decided what we're doing for Mother's Day, voting privileges on episode topics, bonus content, and more. You get Tea Time, which is our online chat, and then the Fast Five, which is a weekly content roundup. Okay. Let's jump into this week's Femme Frame, where we dive into key feminist themes, herstory, cultural context, and more. We'll start with a synopsis of the episode. After months of recovering in the hospital, Ellie is forced to confront the full weight of her grief as she is released to go home. Dina gives Ellie information about the wolves, and after a brutal rejection from the council, concocts a plan to help her track and kill them. This is your spoiler warning, babes. If you don't want to hear anything about this episode, if you haven't seen it, if you don't know why we're going to talk about queer baiting, if you don't know why we're going to talk about whistling, just hit pause, go watch. Podcast will be here when you get back, okay? First and foremost, before we dive into anything significant, a few weeks ago on episode 1, I was adamant that they wouldn't kill Joel off because of Pedro Pascal's star power. And not only did I forget the trauma of watching Sean Bean get his head cut off as Ned Stark, spoilers for HBO's Game of Thrones. I feel like it's a little late for you to be getting spoiled about this, but anyway, if you didn't know that, I forgot about that because trauma, okay? And they obviously did kill Joel, and I just want to say, like, wow, because Bella Ramsey has the fucking juice. They just have what it takes to get it done. Because last week, Bella took my heart to a cheese grater. And this week, she was like, let's throw it in a juicer. I don't know. Ew, that's gross. It worked for me. This is working for me this season because of what Bella is able to pull out. And Bella has such incredible face acting. They actually don't have to say much. They don't have to have much dialogue because the face is doing so much of the heavy lifting. And this episode is no different, but it's really working for me. I'm just really impressed. And especially in an episode where there's so many close-ups. I was watching after the episode where Peter Horr said, like, I want it to be uncomfortably close. So you're like really in it with them in their grief. And that is how I felt. Like I was choked up multiple times this episode just watching. Bella's face work. I absolutely am enchanted by their performance, and I'm really excited to see what they do next as Ellie as the seasons kind of progress. Okay. The beginning of this episode is completely silent. It's that moment of silence, but dragged out, really dragged out quite profoundly. We get one very tiny line from Tommy where he's preparing Joel's body for burial, and then it sort of just like zooms out and you see the wreckage of Jackson and like everything that happened from the Battle of Jackson. And the showrunners, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann in the after episode are very adamant about saying, it's not just Joel that dies. Just because we're following his story, there are other people who also have brothers and daughters who lost people in this battle of Jackson. And what about them? And how do they get to grieve? And I think that's a really interesting take, because this is something that does often get skated over in TV or in movies because we're pushed in on this story. And so I love that we started and sort of zoomed in on Tommy and Joel, but we expand out and we see like, oh yeah, it's not just them. There's other people here that were impacted by this. Now, it's going to be interesting to talk about impacted how, because what happens to Joel is not what happens to everyone else. Not death from infected or from fighting the infected. This is death from something completely different, revenge, murder, right? So that'll be a part of it, but completely silent otherwise. And the only thing that he says, and I was really curious if he would say anything at all, is give Sarah my love. And I absolutely lost it and started crying, because I've said it before and I will say it again. Without Sarah, there is no emotional arc that feels satisfying for Joel, especially once Joel meets Ellie. Sarah's death is the unspoken and unknown web, unspoken from Joel, unknown for a majority of season 1 by Ellie, that weaves the two of them together. And Tommy in this moment could have said anything. After all of these years, it's literally been 25 years since her death. But this hope that we hold on to, that there's something better after life, something connective, that the people that we love are not lost, they're just gone, and that they are existing in another space and time. And obviously, as somebody who is a practicing metaphysician and does tarot and astrology as my job, I obviously believe this, and I found it so touching and so moving that even in this very dismal world, this very droll world where there's not much of any hope, that people still cling on to this and hold on to this sort of really sentimental, very expansive view of soul and spirit in the world, and love, right? Like love is the thing that binds us between worlds. And there's obviously this really great quote from Marvel, and it touches a lot on what happens in this episode. There's this really great quote. It's from WandaVision, where Vision says to Wanda, "What is grief, if not love persevering?" And it's one of the most profound quotes. It sounds silly and facetious because it's coming from a Marvel, like, superhero universe, but isn't that exactly what has carried Abby, right? What is grief, if not love persevering? Her rage that she gets to simmer in is only an extension of her love for her father. And now Ellie has had not as much time as Abby, but 3 months to stew in the hospital and really be held in her solitude for enough time to consider if, this is how her grief as love persevering needs to be exacted. So I just think that's really interesting that after 25 years, Tommy says, give Sarah my love, and that this grief, as love persevering that Tommy has for Sarah too, before there was Tommy and Benji and Maria, and before there was Joel and Ellie, there was Tommy and there was Joel And that world expanded just marginally out when Sarah came. But what really rips my heart out right in the beginning of this episode is the start of Ellie's PTSD, which is something that is also existent in the game. And I'm sure it'll be touched on differently and experienced differently throughout the show as things are. But after so much silence, just this heart-wrenching scream of Ellie reliving this moment of Joel's death. And it absolutely cracked me wide open. And then, because the showrunners are sadists, they changed the fucking opening credits. So now it's just Ellie that pops up out of the mushrooms and no Joel. And thus, the cub becomes the lone wolf. Now, in all fairness, a quote from my Bible, a book of Twilight. What a sick, masochistic lion. A direct quote about me, a person who not only willingly watches this TV show, but then does a whole podcast on it, and in fact planned the launch of my podcast around this season of television. And as a sidebar, I was really worried that podcasting about the content that I love and care about would ruin some of my experience of viewing and watching and experiencing it. But I gotta tell you guys, as someone who's never done drugs in my life, I can only describe this feeling of podcasting about something that I love and care about this much as ecstasy. It is purely the joy of my life to be able to do this thing that I actually really love. I love engaging in pop culture this way and thinking about it broadly and expansively, and this has just been the dream of my lifetime. So getting to do this, like watching this episode with a computer on my lap, I was like, is this ruining the experience for me? But actually it's really enhancing it. So like, thank you guys for listening and being a part of this. It's an incredible journey so far, and I'm really enjoying it. All right, let's get back to the cub becoming the lone wolf. In case you missed it, the show is titled The Last of Us. And guess what? Every episode has an ending of some version of us. So let's go all the way back to season 1. Season 1, episode 1 is the end of the us that is Joel and Tommy and Sarah. Episode 2 is the end of the us that is Joel and Tess. Episode 3 is the last of Bill and Frank. Episode 4 is the last of Kathleen and her revolutionaries. Episode 5 is the end of Henry and Sam. Episode 6 is the end of Tommy and Joel being the us, because now Tommy has Maria and Maria is pregnant, and Joel at the end decides to go off with Ellie, and now they are forging their us officially, definitively. So it is the official sort of end of Tommy and Joel being the us, and other people are being invited into it, and them having their own individual us's, and, you know, still being obviously connected, but he's choosing at that point to go off with Ellie. Ellie is the us. So he's just crossed the whole country to make sure that Tommy's alive. He's like, Tommy's alive. Tommy has an us. Tommy's protected by a pack. I don't need to do this for him, and goes off and does us with Ellie. Okay? Episode 7 is the end of Riley and Ellie. Episode 8 is the end of David and his sheep. Episode 9, quite notably, the end of the Fireflies. And then we get to season 2, right? Episode 1 is the end of what I'm going to say Eugene and Gail. It's sort of the calm before the storm. It's like the end of Jackson as we know it, the end of us this way that we know it. Episode 2 is the end of Joel and Ellie. And that brings us to episode 3, where we're getting the last of Tommy and Joel in this first shot. So with that being said, I just want that on the top of our mind, that there is an end of us, the last of us, that is happening in every episode from the beginning, from the origin. So it's important to note and watch, because now Ellie is a lone wolf. So Ellie in this episode is in my opinion, telling us, the viewer, that there is no other us for her, that this is it for her, that the peak, the epitome of usness for Ellie is her and Joel and their fucking daddy-daughter bullshit. And Gail even echoes this when she's talking to Tommy, because she says, if Ellie's on a path, it's not one that Joel's set her on. Now she's talking about the revenge here and whether or not, Tommy is concerned that Ellie is going to make the same mistakes that Joel has made in the past and lashing out because of his grief. And so she kind of echoes this here and she goes, well, that's maybe just who she is. Some people can't be saved, right? Which is so heart-wrenching after knowing that this is quite literally what Joel has just died for saving her, right? She then goes on, though, to say, no, I think they were walking side by side from the very start. And this sort of, again, gives us a callback to the opening credits where we see sort of the Joel mushroom pop up and then the Ellie mushroom pop up. And now this Joel mushroom has shrunk away and there's this empty space. They don't recenter Ellie to be on the path alone. They keep her in the same position, and we feel, even in the opening credits, the weight of the loss of Joel there. There is no recentering. There is no other us. And this is important for us to understand, us the viewer, because not only were they kindred spirits, but as much as Ellie may appear to be forging these new bonds over the course of the episode, or maybe even over the course of the season, the opening credits tell us the truth. That there is this empty space and that she truly only wishes it to be invested in the us that is her and Joel. So when Dina comes along early in the episode and she brings her peace offering cookies, to me it seemed like Dina, knowingly or unknowingly, is trying to forge an us. She's trying to make Dina and Ellie the us. And it's interesting because in many ways, Dina and Ellie are the balance to each other, where Ellie is impulsive and rash, Dina is calculating and strategic. And Joel and Ellie, we know because Gail just recalled this to us, they are one and the same. They activate each other. They amplify each other. So Ellie doesn't necessarily want to be balanced in this moment. She doesn't want to be, reined in this moment. She doesn't want to be thoughtful in this moment like Dina wants to be thoughtful and intentional and calculated in this move. She just wants to run rampant, much like the cordyceps that we know and perhaps love or fear in The Last of Us, and also much like Mother Nature, which is really prominent in a lot of the season 1 work, but we're seeing it again in this episode when we get to Seattle. Like, seriously, shout out to Mother Nature. Talk about true feminism. Mother Nature is a chef's kiss icon. Mother Nature has reclaimed absolutely everything that humanity ever took from her. Every street, every building, every sign that we see in this episode and in a lot of season 1, in Jackson, when you're in this town, you're not seeing it as much. And then you have so many harsh elements in Wyoming that you're not seeing it as much. But every episode pretty much in season 1 and then this shot of Seattle is just overrun with nature and new earth and growth. And I say this because it's perhaps the most feminine win for the entirety of Mother Nature to just have so much expansion amidst such a desolate and drab world. So this idea of which us does Ellie now belong to is significant because we know from episodes 1 and 2, Ellie isn't really a joiner. She doesn't really want to be a part of the town activities. She's kind of pulled in by Jesse, by Dina, even by Joel to join in on these community activities or participate as like a part of the group that is Jackson. So when she ends up pleading her case to the council, it's almost like she's trying to put herself in the community of Jackson, when we already know as a viewer, and they already know as a community, that she's not really interested. But in order to make her case, she has to plead this. She has to consider herself a part of the us that is Jackson. She literally says, this isn't for me. It's not even for Joel. This is for us. It's about the community of us. It's about the safety of the community of us. And that's the string that she's trying to pull at to get not just Maria on board, because that's really who she's pleading her case to, but as many people as possible. Now, Gail says it best because, of course, she's lying. Of course, it's about Joel. Of course, it's about her. She's in grief. She's enraged. She's in pain. But she takes Jesse's advice and she slows down and she writes it out so that her anger does not overtake her, because she knows that anger isn't going to win the votes. And because of this, we see that she gets 3 yeses, and we can assume that they come from Jesse, who is proud of his bestie for doing what he said, which is like not being overcome by anger, thinking about this from other perspectives and putting it down on paper, even if she doesn't necessarily believe it. She's trying to get other people to believe it. She's trying to get herself to believe it as she's saying it. And then the other 2 yeses, Maria and Tommy. Now, I'm coming back to this moment with Dina and her peace cookies with a very serious question and perhaps some apocalypse math, because I'm very confused about how we have baked goods in a mushroom apocalypse where the mushroom apocalypse was triggered by flour. So are you trying to tell me that they are growing and milling wheat in Jackson, Wyoming? Because I had to take this to Google. I was flabbergasted, like absolutely blown away with the amount, the plethora of cookies that it's not just like, hey, we had like enough for like, 1 or 2 cookies. Like she makes a whole bucket, tub full of cookies. So I asked Google, do they mill wheat in Jackson? Because we've just seen a ton of harsh elements. Like also, couldn't they choose somewhere warmer to have their mushroom apocalypse? Can't they just take the settlement and move somewhere else? Like, why are they in Jackson, Wyoming? I don't understand. Okay. So I did a Google search on this, and here's what Google said. Yes, wheat can be grown in Jackson Hole. While it's not a dominant crop historically due to climate and milling limitations, the National Park Service notes that it can be cultivated. So I understand that maybe they can, but like in the midst of a mushroom apocalypse, are we taking time to grow flour, make flour? Where are we milling it? I mean, I just have so many questions. I have so many thoughts about this because you can't use any of the old flour. So if you have ransacked any of these places, and also like in the midst of an apocalypse where not much new stuff is getting made, we need to be resourceful with what we have, right? So why are we making cookies? I was just blown away. Okay. Not only that, where are they getting sugar, eggs, butter, like all of the ingredients to make not just like a few cookies, again, a tub full of cookies. It was a fuck ton of cookies. I am just concerned because I'm living in America in 2025. I don't know where you're listening to this from, but there is no mushroom apocalypse happening here at present. And I'm not sure that I can afford to make that many cookies in the world that I live in today. And I'm not facing weather challenges or mushroom zombies. So like in the apocalypse, I need the food situation to make sense because the showrunners think through so many other things, and this just doesn't make sense to me. I'm curious to see what your opinion about it is. Okay, tell me your opinions about the cookies in the mushroom apocalypse, okay? Because we cannot be hunting for game. Like, we can't be in season 1 nibbling on this little tiny piece of jerky and hunting for game. And then in season 2, we are just willy-nilly making hundreds of cookies. I mean, it wasn't hundreds, but it was like more than a regular batch. It was a lot of cookies. All right, my rant is over. Dina is trying to forge in us. She perhaps has been trying to forge in us with Ellie for a while now. But I don't know if the way to do that with Ellie is by putting herself in the same lifeboat as Ellie, as far as trying to connect with her through grief. So when Dina says, I loved him too, even though there's truth in that, I was very nervous that Ellie may blow up in this moment. And she sort of just absorbs it. And again, Bella Ramsey and their face acting, just brilliant, takes it and sort of digests that on her face for us to see. And even though she may be able to accept that Dina did love him and is grieving as a fact, there is no room on her lifeboat for Dina's grief. There was only room for Joel. So I think that she accepts that she perhaps is not stranded, not alone, but I do not think that Ellie looks at Dina as someone who can understand the pain and the anger and the absolute despondency that she's in. And even though Dina was also there, Dina was unconscious. She didn't have to watch it. She didn't have to see it. She doesn't have to relive that moment in her mind over and over again. In the game, Dina and Joel don't have a relationship, or at least not one that they have like they do in the show. So Dina and Ellie do go off together to hunt the wolves and to hunt Abby, but Dina in the game doesn't have a personal stake other than her interest and care and loyalty for Ellie. And I think even in the game, she says, where you go, I go. So it's not about her relationship to Joel and her desire to take that further. It's actually her desire to just be a ride or die for Ellie. And we love that. We love a best friend who's a ride or die. So let's talk about the sexual tension, okay, between Ellie and Dina. Because I've read a lot of romance novels, and you know who else clearly does? Craig Mazin, the writer of this episode and one of the showrunners. They have one horse. They have one bed. And Ellie is the queen of a friends to lovers plotline. And of course, you can't forget the slow burn here. In the game, Ellie and Dina are already on. They are basically, at this point, already a couple, a thing. They're doing their thing. But the show is sort of doing a will they, won't they approach. And honestly, they threw in a lot of queer baiting this episode from Dina to Ellie. Like, I literally felt my heart sink when Ellie says to Dina, oh, just go back to Jesse. And she's like, I got the smug face on. And she's like, I already did. Like, it's twisting this knife for Ellie, who is already trying to play it cool. She's already trying to play it off as this kiss wasn't that big of a deal. And the fact that she's already so down bad for Dina. And this is just solidifying that they, Dina and Ellie, are actually not in us. But I absolutely loved all of the romance tropes. I mean, literally, I have a list of notes that I take during the episode. And I was like, oh my God, one horse. And even like when Dina says that, she's like, we're going to take one horse. And I was like, this is for the romance girlies. And then they're out on the road. And I was like, I love this. And then they are sleeping in the tent. And I was like, oh my God, one bed. I was just kicking my feet. I love that they have this slow burn. I love that they're dragging it out a little bit more than they did in the video game, because I think that's more realistic, especially from episode 1, where Ellie calls the other gay girl like the other one. It's not even just like, oh, like you used to, hook up with Kat because that was somebody you were interested in, and this is like a thing that's happening in the world. Dina, like anybody who is trying to figure out their sexual orientation, is trying to dip a toe in the water, ask her queer friend questions, pull at some of the strings, and I think it's just really well done that they're dragging it out a little bit more over the course of what will clearly be the season. So in the same episode, this episode, we get the introduction to the Seraphites, which is the name of the religious group that we see in Seattle that have sort of like the scar marks on their face with the hammers and the whistling. They've got a really strong whistle game. They do in the video game as well. It's terrifying when you hear it. And they follow a woman that they call the prophet. This will become important for us as we go forward. It's going to be a plot point that I would say we want to pay attention to. But the main thing that we're getting right here, the introduction that we get to the Seraphites, is a father and a daughter, or presumably so, right? And they are discussing safety, and she asks for a hammer, and he gives her one. And this is clearly supposed to be a one-to-one comp for Ellie and for Joel, especially if you go back to season 1, where Ellie, for the first 3 episodes, is begging for a gun. She's asking for a gun over and over and over again. And then in episode 6, we see that relationship forge, that even though she already has a gun at this point, they're taking time out for Joel to teach her how to shoot, how to aim, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's when their bond is truly formed and solidified. So when we see them dead at the end of the episode, these 2 Seraphites, the father and the daughter. So not only is this further justifying to Ellie why the wolves need to die, that it's not just about Joel, that they're bad people outside of this, but it's a physical representation of how she feels. Watching this father and daughter be dead on the side of the road, and to a certain degree internally, that's how she feels. We already know that she's somebody who can handle gore and death and violence, and she's just sitting and staring. And this is, again, I think, a part of her PTSD, that there is a piece of her that died with Joel. There is a piece of her that is looking at this and sees that this version of us, the father and the daughter, is dead and gone, and she feels the weight of it and the pain of it and the absolute solidarity of it. And I think that knowing that this piece of her has died with Joel is important. And there is like a visual representation of this in the episode too. So if you go back to episode 9 of season 1, look for the light. Now this is calling back to the Fireflies tagline, right? When you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. In that episode, as they're pushing Joel down the staircase, the lights are flickering. And then when he grabs the gun and he starts his shooting rampage, the lights go out and it's sort of dark. And this is like the light in him going out, because Ellie is the only thing that matters, and Ellie is his purpose, and Ellie is what's driving him forward. But it's the piece of his soul that's like, I'm going to turn off this part of myself and just plow through anybody that's standing between me and this person that I love and care about, because that's my us, that's my person, that's my pack. And in the hospital, so they're in the hospital in Salt Lake City, right, when that happens. Now, in the hospital, when Ellie is being released, we get a similar type of deal. The light goes out. The lights are, I don't know if they're flickering. I'd have to go back and watch this episode. But it progressively gets darker as Ellie's walking out, because that's her solidifying in her brain what she knows that she needs to do now that she's being released from her own solidarity. And this brings me to my last point before we do some like quick points, and I'll talk about them, which is Gail and her place in telling Ellie's lore. Before Ellie can even leave the hospital, Gail pops in to check in on Ellie, and Ellie is perhaps being somewhat honest in this moment when she says, yeah, I miss him. He meant a lot to me. So yeah, upset and sad. She's just trying to like get through this conversation and do like as much therapy talk as she can, because she doesn't want to be honest with Gail here. And Gail even says this later to Tommy when she's like, she's a liar. And he's like, well, maybe she was lying. And she's like, she's a liar. And maybe the only person that she's ever been honest with is Joel. And this is important for us to acknowledge, because Gail is very good at her job. And she was able to piece together that Joel was lying to her, that this isn't why you're really here, that you're not really here because you have a 19-year-old daughter adopted daughter that is giving you 19-year-old problems. You're here because there's something else. And she knows this with Ellie too, and she can't quite piece it together. And she even says, like, he said he saved you, but, that's not doing somebody wrong. And Ellie goes, well, he saved me a lot of times, so I don't know what he's talking about, but, I wish I could have had another conversation with him to, like, clear this up and let him off the hook. And then, like, I guess I'm going to have to let myself off the hook for that. And she's doing therapy talk, and she's doing it well because Ellie is smart and she's calculated in her own ways. Not like Dina calculated, but she's a good people observer. She's good at understanding what other people need in order to sort of get across what she needs to get across. And it's, in season 1, especially when there's a lot of her innocence and her youth and her naivety, some of this is just driven by her desire to connect and her fear, right? This fear that she has of being alone. And that's what she says to Sam. She's writing on the whiteboard. She's like, I'm afraid of being alone. And now her greatest fear has come to fruition because even though she has Dina and she has Jesse and she has Tommy and she has Gail and she has Maria and she has Benji and she has all of these people that maybe love and care about her, they're not Joel. And she's being left alone by the person that she loves and cares about the most. Her version of us. So, I don't know how much of Catherine O'Hara as Gail we're going to get in this season, but I think it's important to acknowledge that she is sort of the bridge of understanding intention or giving the audience a very clear way of understanding what's happening. So if you're taking what Ellie says at face value, where she's like, didn't have another conversation with him, you're maybe missing something deeper that Gail knows and understands and shares with Tommy later on, which is they have had a conversation. They have reconciled to a certain degree. We don't know what that is, but we do know that it's happened because, before Joel's death, the guitar is back in her room. How did it get there if he was strumming it the night before? We know that she has this sort of outburst conversation with Jesse where she's like, he's still him, I'm still me, and we're still us. And nothing's ever going to change that. So everyone can stop talking about us or worrying about us and bothering us essentially because we are an us and we are going to figure it out because it's a we, it's an us. It's not a you need to come in and tell us how to do it. We are us. We know how to do it. So I think this is really interesting because obviously she can't be honest with Gail. She can't say, I'm immune and he killed a whole bunch of people to get me out of a situation where I was going to be killed to create this immunity for other people or this vaccine or this hope for humanity. Which, by the way, we don't even know if that's true. We do not know if killing Ellie would have actually provided a vaccine, and it would have been nice if they would have maybe done some like other medical testing, I don't know. Anyway, did it have to be that we had to like kill her and then like to cut her brain open for this to be the thing that is giving us the vaccine? I don't know. I'm just saying, like, couldn't we have run some maybe like mild tests before we went through this? Anyway, going into this season, when we see that her and Joel are having problems, a lot of that is driven by the fact that her purpose is to save humanity. And she has this big, huge, heavy burden that Marlene has essentially put on her. And we know that her moral compass is pointing to a place with all of her survivor's guilt from season 1, where she's watched Riley die, she's watched Tess die, she's watched Sam die from this infected, these people that she's forged bonds with, the people that she cares about. And she's got survivor's guilt. And so this purpose that sits on her shoulders, which is like, you could save these people. Maybe you can't save them. They're already lost. They're already gone. But you can save other people. You can help other people never have to worry about this or face this again. And that's an incredible purpose, but quite a heavy one for somebody who's 14. And Joel makes that decision for her, right? He doesn't even let that be a choice or a decision. And by the way, neither do the Fireflies. I always want to point that out, that she was not given a choice by anybody. She was not given a choice by the Fireflies. She was not given a choice by Joel. But with the choice being taken out of her hands, her purpose is sort of diminished. And I think that a part of her petulance in episode 1 is like she's been walking around aimless because this thing that she was supposed to do has been taken away from her. And now that she has been in the hospital for 3 months and she's having this conversation with Gail, I think we are discovering that she's recognizing that her purpose has changed, that her purpose was Joel. And we already know, because Joel plowed down 19 people at the end of season 1, that his purpose is Ellie. Ellie brought him back online. Ellie has given him direction, purpose, intention. And for him to have this purpose is why he's willing to die for it in episode 2. And now Ellie has had months of grief sitting and stewing within her, where I think she can recognize, well, my purpose was to do this thing. But if that was taken away from me, the only other purpose that I had that was meaningful to me, that was connective to me, was being Joel's daughter. And now that's being taken away from me too. This person that was my purpose, that was my world, essentially. So I just think that this is such an interesting conversation between Gail and between Ellie, because I think it pulls at a lot of that in the subtext. Obviously, it's not saying that. She's not saying Joel was my purpose, but she's saying, like, yeah, he was important to me. And then after this conversation with her, like, the lights go out. Like, she doesn't have to pretend anymore to be fine, to be okay. She just gets to be in her grief. And then we get to see what the grief and the anger of her grief turns into, over the course of the rest of the season. All right. That's the main points of our Femme Frame today. But I'm going to read you my hot take bullet points from this episode, because this is my internal dialogue as I am typing my notes feverishly while I'm watching the episode. And I just thought they were funny, and they were other points that didn't really fit into what I wanted to talk about in the Femme Frame, but that there's stuff that I do want to talk about and touch on. So we'll just do them quick, like hot takes, and, maybe I'll go a little bit deeper into some of them. So first and foremost, the episode title, The Path. If the motto and the tagline of this season is every path has a price, I think this is really interesting, because this is setting us up for the path that Ellie is taking. And because every path has a price, okay, we should be concerned about what the price is that she is going to pay because she is taking this path. She's making a choice. The town says no, and she says to the town, because she's a liar, and Gail tells us this, I will accept whatever the council decides. But that's not true. And so she goes off on her own. And so what is the price that Ellie is going to pay by forging this path ahead? Okay, that's my first point. In my bullet point notes, I have a note from when Jesse was hammering the wood into the ground as they're rebuilding Jackson. I was like, okay, Jesse, with your sexy little man arms. Like, we love a visual representation of manslut in any TV show, in any book, in any fictional world. But like Jesse hammering away, I was like, am I drooling? It was great. I loved it. I also love this part where you think that Ellie's going to go and take the watch, this infamous watch that Joel wears from the very beginning, but instead she like immediately rips it back and takes his gun. And to me, this was so symbolic. The watch that Joel has had since Sarah's given it back to him, his time is up, his time is out. And instead of her taking that for sentimental reasons, which is what I thought she was going to do, makes much more sense for Ellie's character. I am much more sentimental than Ellie is. That she would then take the gun because Joel was her protector, and now she is stepping into his role and, keeping that piece of him that was her protector close by. Then we get the way that Ellie says when she's talking to Dina. This sent chills through my body. This was absolutely chilling, the way that she says Abby. And I think it's important to note, Abby's not in this episode, and I don't know how much of her we're going to get in the rest of the season, because she is only listed, Caitlin Deaver is only listed as a guest star. So we know that we'll see Abby again, just by the way that she says it, but I think it's important to once again draw connection between Ellie and Abby in this moment. When Abby was 19, Joel killed her father to save Ellie. When Ellie is 19, Abby kills Joel to avenge her father. So, where the cub has now become the lone wolf in perhaps both of those scenarios because their father figure is lost, the grief, the weight, the anger, the absolute despondency that Abby has been living with and stewing in is exactly the same pain that she's just caused, which is why it's such a rich story that now, for somebody that we are potentially endeared to in Abby, at least a little bit maybe, because we can understand she's lost her father, and like Joel plowed through all of these people. And Troy Baker in an interview has this great sort of speech monologue about how there is no karmic retribution in this world, that there is no justice, there is no balance. And I'm paraphrasing what he says, but really interesting, right? Because this world that doesn't have any karmic retribution, they are creating it on their own. And like people are dying and being killed all the time in the zombie apocalypse. And yet this one thing that has happened, Abby also says it, she's like, there are just some things that we can agree are wrong. And because she has this sense of justice and her own moral compass, it's like everyone has their own moral compass and what they are and are not willing to do ethically and morally in the zombie apocalypse. And I think it's just interesting that the monster has sort of created the monster that's coming, or the shadow that's coming. The rage that Abby is infected with is the rage that she's just now incited in Ellie. Now, the prophet. I'm coming back to the prophet. I know we already talked about her, but in my notes, I put it down. It's giving Melisandre. Now, if you did not watch Game of Thrones, I will also say I put down another note that was like, it's giving If God Was a Woman by Ariana Grande. So that is our playlist for the prophet, and I can't wait to make a sticker of the prophet, a picture of the prophet eventually when we see her. And like, If God Was a Woman, because I think it'll be a funny sticker. By the way, we have stickers for sale. If you are a sticker junkie, you can buy them. They also have this really interesting like switch of roles between Ellie and Abby from the game. So like in the game, Abby is brolic. She is big. She's vast. She is buff. And you see that a lot of it is driven by her grief that she just works out when she's having these nightmares and these night terrors. So, same thing. She's having PTSD through her night terrors. She's now causing Ellie to have PTSD from this thing that she's done. And obviously it doesn't even fill a hole inside of her, right? So, or at least we don't know that for sure yet, but we can assume that this probably doesn't make her feel much better or relieve any of the tension or the pressure of her father being dead. And same thing with Ellie. We can probably assume that chasing and killing Abby is not going to alleviate or relieve the tension that is aching in her heart. But what I really love about this is they sort of switch these roles, because in the game, Ellie is quite tiny. I think it's just interesting because they change the storyline. So we see Ellie having these physical workouts. She's boxing. And in her boxing, because of the way that she's doing it, like, what? Were you doing push-ups? And she's like in crunches too. So she's using physical exertion to alleviate some of the tension that she's feeling in her grief. And this is not something that we saw for Ellie in the game, but it's something that we did see for Abby. And so I feel like they're switching these roles a little bit, but I really think it's a nice, not just nod to that part of the game, but to Abby and Ellie as a whole. Okay, then we have the town hall, and I literally wrote, is this Gilmore Girls? Are Dina and Ellie just a version of Lorelai and Rory in a town hall meeting, but it's the apocalypse? Because that's the only thing I could think about, especially when we were seeing like the guy going on and on about corn. I was like, this feels very Stars Hollow to me. Okay, Then in that same scene, I wrote, it takes a village, because the woman who stands up and gives, her 2 cents about sending resources when Jackson's rebuilding, she hands the baby off and she even says, like, can someone hold the baby? And so this idea of, like, in womanhood, that it takes a village, that we cannot do it alone, that we must do it together, that she needs this space and this time. And so she passes off the baby, so that she can have a moment to speak her truth. I think that was a really nice touch in there. I also love that Seth defends Ellie's point and then later on even creates an us, like, sympathetic to our cause. And she's like, there's an our cause. And he's like, you're the one who said us. You're the one who said we are an us. And I thought that was a really nice connective tissue from the first episode to now. And we'll see maybe if we get a little bit more of Seth's story. It seems like maybe there's a little bit more for the showrunners to want to tell there. I also feel like Jackson just has better democracy at this point than America does. Gail just drinking. I just love that you get to see her sitting there drinking. And she's like, yeah, I'm an alcoholic and I smoke a ton of weed. Like, I'm an addict and that's how I cope with not just the mushroom apocalypse and the world that we're living in, but the fact that I, who am a therapist, am supposed to have a therapist myself to offset some of this, and I don't. So my therapist is weed and alcohol. All right. And then I've got Ellie bringing the coffee beans to him. I was like, is she going to put the watch down? What is she going to leave here? And she just puts down a few coffee beans, this thing that she knows that Joel loved so much. And I thought it was brilliant and wonderful. And I did, in fact, sob. And then I just love that Dina's like, all right, I'm going to crack open the burn book and then I'm going to sign off. But if you want to listen to spoilers from the game, those will be at the end of the episode after we sign off and say goodbye and do all of that stuff. Okay, so let's crack open our burn book and do our superlatives for this episode. The Bold and Bothered award, I think, has to go to Ellie. Even though nothing in this episode manifests directly as feminine rage, I think her anger is mounting as the episode goes, even though she hasn't had a full-on rage out yet. It's almost like she's harboring that rage for when she actually confronts Abby. Okay, the Shiro Award. I may not agree with this in theory, but in actuality, there is a reason that I would be patient zero in the mushroom apocalypse. And it's because I've never said no to a baked good in my entire life. So here's to you, Dina. The Shiro Award goes to you for your unreasonable amount of mushroom apocalypse cookies. The Femme Fatale Award. Gail, just calling out that Tommy is not here to check in on Gail and her well-being. He totally wants her advice. He totally wants her to psychoanalyze the situation and what's going on with Ellie. And she's just like, you're not here for me. Like, tell me what you're really here for, free of charge. I just thought that was really funny. Catherine O'Hara in this role is brilliant. Love it. Speak Your Truth trophy. Dina in this exchange with her and Ellie where she's like, you could have just asked me to come. And Ellie was like, I didn't know I could. And she's like, well, now you know. I just thought that whole exchange was really good. But that first line where she's like, you could have just asked. I love it. I thought that was really great. I thought it was her trying to forge the us. And then honorary heartthrob for this episode, Jesse and his slutty little arms. All right. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Femme Furious. If you liked this week's episode, share it out with your friends, leave a comment, give us a review. It's all really helpful. I'll be back on Thursday discussing Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, a book that I really loved and cannot wait to talk about with you guys. And then we'll be back here again, obviously, next Monday with the second half of the season. We're almost through it. I'm like so sad to be like halfway through. It's episode 3, episode 4. So we'll be back on Monday with episode 4 of The Last of Us. If you're staying to listen to the game spoilers, that will be in just a few seconds. If not, I will see you on Thursday or see you back here next Monday. And until then, Give Sarah my love. All right, if you're still here, you've either played the game or you don't care that you're about to be spoiled. So let's talk about Dina, because in the game, she is pregnant. Okay, if you've ever seen that YouTube video, it's like one of my favorite YouTube videos. Anyway, Dina is pregnant, and she's pregnant with Jesse's baby. And we only discover this like as she's on the road with Ellie. So in the game, Ellie and Dina set off like the day after or like 2 days after Joel dies. There's not as big of a stretch of time as there is in the show. And I think that they did that to create more tension for Ellie internally. So we see, I think, the start of that in this episode when she throws up at the end when she sees the two dead Seraphites. And now I'm curious about it because it didn't seem to me like Mel was pregnant last episode. And, you know, there is a love triangle that sort of happens again. Ellie and Abby are parallels. This happens again. So there's Jesse, Dina, and Ellie and their little love triangle and a pregnant Dina. And then there is Mel, Owen, and Abby and a pregnant Mel. So it'll be really interesting because I was like, oh, maybe they're not making Mel pregnant because they don't want to show a pregnant death because Mel dies in the game. So I don't know if it's just because of that, where I was like, oh, maybe they don't want her to be pregnant and they're just not going to put that in there because they don't want to kill a pregnant woman. Like maybe that's just like too much for TV. But now I don't know because now they've just changed the timeline. So I don't know if they're just doing that so it's dragging it out a little bit. And now maybe the thing that pushes Owen towards Mel is the fact that they've just witnessed Abby's absolute bloodlust and like seeing somebody that you love as Owen and being like, oh, like I love this person, but like I don't even know who you are. Even younger Abby in her dream said to, you know, Abby in older reality in her dream, she was like, I don't know you. And so imagine Owen, who has like grown with her during this period of time, watching her kill Joel, being like, I don't know who this person is. And maybe that pushes him towards Mel, who was also clearly not down for this and maybe a little bit more tender. So that'll be interesting too, to see, you know, that whether or not Mel is pregnant is what I mean. So I think it's also setting us up that the rest of the season is going to be Ellie's POV, which in the game, this is how it's set up. And I was wondering how they would do it in the show. In the game, you play as Ellie until you get sort of to a certain point, and then you switch over and you play the exact same days over in Abby's POV. So you play 3 days as Ellie, and then you play 3 days as Abby, and then there's sort of like a final confrontation. So I think it's really interesting how they're going to do it, because it seems to me that even though it looks like the wolves are part of this season moving forward, I think you still have to see Abby, but it seems to me like we will follow Ellie pretty conventionally through her journey at that point in time. And then it seems to me like the next season is setting up to get the 3 days from Abby's POV where Caitlin Dever may be considered the star of the show and Bella Ramsey is the guest star. I'm really interested to see how they do that and how that pans out. So, all right, that's our episode for today. I will see you guys next week. Love you so much. Bye.